Stormpeak! Halt!
Lord King, it's good you've arrived.
Lord Goldenrock, I hear you've got a wee problem with the dead.
Ah, my king, we met their vanguard in a clearing to the south. They mauled us badly, but my lads held their ground. Is this all you've brought?
'Tis so. It's all that could be gathered in so short a time.
Lord King, forgive me, it may not be enough. We barely held their vanguard. Now the bulk of the undead forces have crossed Stony Creek.
It will have to be enough. The goblins press hard on Eastwatch. Wolf Riders probe our defences around Goldenfield. If I had more dwarves to bring, I would ha.
Ah, Lord.
Murderden, have you seen what the engineers of South Pass have cooked up? We can handle some skeletons.
Almost there, my puppets. Ah, more dwarves. Dictatorix, you're supposed to be good at this thing. See that they are removed from my path. Yes, my master.
The forces of the Undead are led by Moxis the Reanimator, a level 3 necromancer with the spells Fireball, Revive and Heal. As always, he's joined by his unfortunate apprentice, Gangrenous Hex, a level 1 lich with the spell Reanimate, and he's now earned the heroic ability Spell Focus. And Autocratix, the level 1 lich with the spell Poison Blades. The Revenant Captain, Dictatorix, leads the Leviathan Guard, a unit of 19 Revenant Warriors, while Rigamortix, the Revenant Champion, leads the Worm Hewers, 19 Revenant Linebreakers. Rounding out their Revenant Infantry, we have the Warriors of the Catacombs, 20 Revenant Warriors. The Wickerwood Champion leads the Wickerwood Soldiers, 19 Skeleton Soldiers, and he has earned the heroic trait Bladestorm. The Wormreach Spears are 20 Skeleton Spearmen, and we have 2 Revenant Chariots, helmed by the Revenant Warriors Superix and Victorix, and both carrying skeletal archers. The forces of the Dwarves are formed of 2 elements, the first being reinforcements from Storm Peak, led by Baridoc King, the Dwarf King of the Silver Mountains. He has the heroic trait Shield Wall and wields a Sword of Star Silver. He leads the Hammerheart Oathsworn, a unit of 19 Dwarf Warriors, up-armoured since their last appearance. Joining him is Vorik Grimhelm, a Dwarf Champion leading the Wrath of Storm Peak, a unit of 19 Dwarf Linebreakers. The Goldenfield Recruits, 20 Human Spearmen, and Torwain, a Dwarf Light Catapult. The second element are the Westslope Dwarves, led by Murderden Goldenrock, a Dwarf Captain, and the Westslope Spears, 19 Dwarf Spearmen, who earned a battle honour after their performance in the last battle. Bronra the Crone returns, a level 2 Dwarf Spellcaster with the spells Explosive Ammunition and Stoneheart, as do the Westslope Archers, 10 Dwarf Archers, and the Stony Creek Watch, 10 Dwarf Border Guard. The borders set and the armies deployed. Along the centre line of the battlefield are 3 objectives: the Archway, the Oathstone, and the Ruins. The objective for both sides is to capture and hold these areas. Whoever holds the most after turn 8 will be victorious. To capture an objective, a unit must activate within 2 inches of that objective, while there are no enemy units within 5 inches of it. Once an objective is captured, it remains so unless the opposition can capture it back. Let's get underway. Initiative for the first turn goes to the Undead with a 10. The Wickerwood soldiers surge forward, mirrored reluctantly by the Goldenfield recruits. Moxis shuffles across and gathers the energy for a fireball, directed at the dwarf-like catapult. However, the weave thins and he finds himself becalmed. The Westslope archers advance and loose an ineffective volley which clatters around the advancing Wickerwood soldiers. The warriors of the catacombs move on the ruins, as Bronra the Crone passes Torwain's crew a softly glowing shot, enchanted with the explosive ammunition spell. The undead left flank advances as one, the Wormhewers, Leviathan Guard and Wormreach spears moving in unison. The dwarves of Storm Peak march to meet them. Torwain pivots and releases her glowing shot towards the warriors of the catacombs. It hits the ground before the revenants and bursts, spraying the front rank with red hot shards. 3 of the revenants are cut to pieces. Superix directs his chariot alongside the Wickerwood soldiers, the skeletal archer on the back sending arrows towards the Goldenfield recruits, though all are wide. Murderden and the Westslope spears march on the ruins, as Victorix directs his chariot opposite them. The Stony Creek Watch run forward through the trees on the flank, and Gangrenous Hex advances, waiting for his time to shine. Autocratics is caught in an undead daze and shuffles forward mindlessly. So a pretty uneventful turn 1. The dwarf catapult has caused a few casualties, but other than that both sides have just advanced.
Suffer not the living despite.
Initiative for turn 2 goes to the dwarves with a double 6, which means, as the only living unit on the undead side, Moxis steps into a hornet's nest, immediately becoming disordered as the insects swarm him.
Blasted insects.
That seems on brand. Bronra the Crone starts us off, drawing the runes for Stoneheart towards the Hammerheart Oathsworn, but the shifting weave saps away the magic and the spell fizzles. The Wormreach spears advance up the roadway to the arch, as Torwain releases another shot towards the warriors of the catacombs. Adjusting from her last shot, the crew land their stone in the centre of the unit, knocking 3 further revenants from their feet. Unperturbed, the revenants march onwards, then wheel back slightly. The Westslope archers loose a volley towards the Wormhewers, their closest target, but perhaps still shaken from their last encounter, the arrows fail to have any effect. Uncaring of the shower of arrows, the Wormhewers advance on the dwarves. The Stony Creek Watch loose a volley at the Wormreach spears. Most arrows clatter off the stone archway, and the volley has no effect on the skeletons. A giant and inconvenient arm obscures the Stony Creek Watch's move deeper into the woods. Dictatorix leads the Leviathan Guard forward to support the Wormhewers, as Baridoc King leads the Hammerheart Oathsworn slowly forward to meet them. Autocratics comes out of his daze long enough to mutter some old man gibberish that unfortunately has no relevance whatsoever to the current situation.
When I was a boy, we used rocks to comb our hair.
Thanks for that. The Wrath of Storm Peak advance alongside the Hammerheart Oathsworn, and Gangrenous Hex waits until he's needed. Murderden Golden Rock leads the Westslope spears forward, then wheels back, allowing Torwain a clear view, as Victorix trundles around the ruins. The Goldenfield recruits overcome their initial nerves and advance in line with the heavily armoured dwarves, before wheeling to face the Wickerwood soldiers. Speaking of which, the Wickerwood champion leads his soldiers forward into the woods, a smidgen too far, before wheeling to face the human spearmen. Moxis drains the life from the stinging insects around him with a cantrip, before invoking a fireball aimed at the Goldenfield recruits. The ball of fire leaves his hand and explodes among the ranks of spearmen. Whilst their shields foil some of the blast, 2 men are blown screaming to the ground. Under Baridoc's stern gaze, the remainder hold their position, determined to prove themselves. Superix holds his chariot for a moment to allow the archer on the back to continue to reinforce stereotypes about skeletal archers, before walking his chariot slowly forward. At the end of turn 2, the lines are closing. The catapult continues to prove its worth. Moxis manages to burn some spearmen, but the archers on both sides have proven to be utterly useless so far.
Hold your ground. Edmund's counting on us.
Initiative on turn 3 goes to the Dwarves with a 10. Torwain pivots to support the front line, releasing a stone shot into the Wormhewers. Striking the closest corner of the unit, it smashes into their ranks, ripping Revenants apart. 6 Revenants are destroyed by the stone ball. Ouch! The Wickerwood champion leads his soldiers in a charge through the woods at the Goldenfield recruits. The skeletons strike hard, axes hooking shields aside as swords thrust into exposed flesh. 6 spearmen fall in the initial assault, the champion felling 2 himself before the men of Goldenfield retaliate. As the front rank falls, those behind thrust their spear points over their fallen comrades and shatter the skeletal forms before them. 4 skeleton soldiers crumple to pieces. The undead assault is too much for the recruits, still in training with the dwarves, and they begin to lose heart. 1 brave soul destroys a further skeleton before they fall back to the Westslope archers. The Stony Creek Watch loose a volley into the Leviathan guard, their arrows peppering the undead ranks. 1 of the Revenant drops as 2 arrows strike true. Realising the odds not currently in his favour, Dictatorix commands the Wormhewers and his own Leviathan guard to move back out of reach of the heavily armoured dwarves before him, delaying the engagement until it can be made more favourable. Frustrated by the retreating Revenants, Vorik wields the Wrath of Storm Peak and charges the Wormreach spears through the archway. Their attack is hindered by the narrow gap, but Vorik leads the charge, his mighty maul sweeping all before him. 2 skeletons fall to him, and a further 3 fall to the dwarves at his side. The skeletons make good use of the funneling terrain, and 3 heavily armoured dwarves are spitted on bronze spears as they try to force the gap. 2 further skeletons are destroyed in the close confines, but despite having the momentum and maintaining good order, the skeletons are unyielding, and so the Wrath of Storm Peak are forced to move back from the defensive position. Gangrenous Hex channels the Weave into a reanimate spell on the Wickerwood soldiers, but the magic is weak and results only in the slight shifting of scattered bones. Bronra the Crone turns to the crew of Torwain and passes them another softly glowing stone shot, enchanted with the explosive ammunition spell. As Autocratix continues to mumble incoherently, failing to cast poison blades on the warriors of the catacombs. The Westslope archers loose a shower of arrows over the heads of the retreating Goldenfield recruits to deadly effect. 2 of the skeletons are smashed to pieces as they are peppered with arrows. Moxis focuses on the arcane weave around him, taking a moment to ensure he has a firm grasp on the energies before launching a ball of fire towards the disordered Goldenfield recruits. The fireball explodes among them, throwing 2 more to the ground as the rest hunker behind their shields. With a shout of encouragement from Baridoc, they rise up, nervously holding their ground. Muradin leads the Westslope spears forward to drive off the weakened warriors of the catacombs. A single dwarf easily a match for a Revenant.
Stick 'em good, spears.
Spears thrust towards the undead warriors, but their bronze armour and shields turn points aside. or the undead nature ignores the strikes. A bill in the second rank pulls aside an oxidized shield as a second dwarf drives his spear home, one of the revenants dropping, a stiffened husk. But the remaining revenants counterattack. Pushing past spearheads, their axes and swords reach out, seeking unprotected flesh. 3 unfortunate dwarves fall to them, and the rest are forced back into the woods where they regroup to continue the fight. However, they regroup far enough away from the ruins to allow the undead to capture the area as Victorix continues to roll around them. The archer on the back looses a flurry of arrows towards Torwain, but they scatter wide. Baridoc wields the Hammerheart Oathsworn and relentlessly advances on the retreating revenants, while keeping his eye on the wavering Goldenfield recruits. Superix rumbles forward, veering left, as his archer looses an arrow into the dirt in front of him. At the end of turn 3, casualties are mounting on all of the frontline undead units, but they're also starting to give some back, dominating the dwarven left.
Mine Tuak hungers.
Initiative on turn 4 goes to Moxis with an 8. The Wickerwood soldiers surge forward towards the wavering Goldenfield recruits, their champion leading the way. Favoured by the gods' poor memory, they lay into the spearmen with heightened strength, slaying 3 despite the humans' defensive stance. The Goldenfield recruits strike back valiantly, 3 skeletons fall into their spear points. A 4th is scattered as the recruits begin to give ground, before they turn and run, the horrors before them too much.
Run for your life!
As they flee, a wave of panic ripples out from them. The Hammerheart Oathsworn are thrown into disorder as the warriors in the back rank bemoan the unreliability of men. The Westslope archers are thrown into disarray as the Goldenfield recruits flee through their ranks. And the Westslope spears remain stoic, more concerned with what's in front of them than the fate of the men behind.
And what of Edmund the Orcs?
Baridoc quickly restores order within the ranks of the Hammerheart Oathsworn, reminding them of the valour shown by more experienced human soldiers, and eyeing the disaster unfolding behind him, falls back with his bodyguard to remind the Westslope archers of their duty. Superix swings his chariot around and drives it into the flank of the Westslope archers, forced into the woods by a quirk of fate rather than by design. As the chariot skirts the dwarf's formation, he lashes out with his double-bit axe, strength enhanced by the momentum of his charge, and cuts down 3 spear dwarves.
What in the world is that?
Those on the flank attempt to hold him back, but their spears are unable to find purchase on the wicker war machine as it passes by.
How do you kill it?
Unhappy with the woods on his flank, Murderdin rallies the Westslope spears, in good order, in the open ground to his left. The Westslope archers reform after the disruption to their ranks, not needing Baridoc's reminders after all, and loose a ragged volley at the approaching Wickerwood soldiers. Their undead nature shrugs off the rain of arrows. Moxis, massaging a handful of hornet stings, lets the world pass him on by. Torwain pivots and releases her glowing shot towards Victorix and his chariot. The shot clips the left sideboard, shattering the wicker railing into pieces before detonating beyond its target. The suspended platform rocks violently, but the chariot continues to roll on, damaged but not destroyed. Dictatorix, seeking whatever advantage he can gain, charges the Wrath of Storm Peak in the flank. Vorik Grimhelm, the dwarven champion, pushes to the flank to meet them. The Revenants strike, thrusting past the champion to fell 2 heavily armoured dwarves. Vorik sweeps his massive maul before him, shield and armour no defence against the irresistible force of his swing. 3 Revenants are bowled aside. The remaining dwarves cheer Vorik on as he catches another Revenant on the backswing, forcing the rest to regroup out of reach. Bronra the Crone draws runes in the air before her, casting Stoneheart on her fellow Westslope dwarves. However, the strands of magic escape her grasp. Autocratics, stares into space vacantly. If he had the ability to drawl, he would be. The Stony Creek Watch move up through the trees and loose a volley at the Wormreach spears behind the archway. The stones block a couple of arrows, but enough pass through to scatter one of the reanimated skeletons. Gangrenous Hex, perhaps distracted by the lack of magical activity around him, also fails to achieve anything. The Wormreach spears, content to hold the archway, stand firm. The Wormhewers wheel back and shift to the right, biding their time and waiting for better odds before charging the Hammerheart Oathsworn. The warriors of the Catacombs wheel and advance on the hard-pressed Westslope spears. Muradin orders shields raised, the dwarves intending to endure. And endure they do. The revenants crash into their shields and are held at bay, axes and swords unable to pierce the dwarves' defence. The spears in the second rank thrust over those before them, claiming one of the revenants. Before the dwarves disengage, the revenants trapped against the ruins. Still rocking violently from the impact of Torwain's shot, Victoric struggles to maintain his footing. After taking a moment to steady himself, he drives his chariot onwards, the archer on the back loosing a single arrow towards Torwain. It flutters high, before dropping to strike one of the crew members in the thigh, taking him from the fight. The remaining crew look around as they hear his cry of pain, but assuring them he's alright, the rest of the crew carry on. So ends turn 4. Mox's forces are picking apart the dwarf centre and left, the more numerous undead overwhelming the isolated dwarf units, but not without cost. The dwarf right remains strong, while all the undead blocks are starting to look rather haggard.
I'm impressed. They hold ground almost as well as a dwarf.
Will Baridoc make it into combat? Are catapults overpowered? And will autocratics do a thing? Find out in the next episode of Drag. Nope. Find out next time, which shouldn't be as long a wait. I hope. Cheers.